let's do digital ID. It's time. It really is. So imagine a world where your ability to buy food, travel, or even log onto the internet is entirely controlled by the government. A world where declining a government-issued digital ID makes you a second-class citizen. Oh yeah, they did that before, remember? Remember how they did that with vaccine passports? There were those who were good people and could enjoy their lives, and then there were those who were bad people and they couldn't do anything. Well, that's pretty much what a mandatory digital ID system will lead us to. And it isn't speculation. It's already happening. So let's start with where all of this began then. And as usual, it began with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 16.9 under Agenda 30, which we of course signed up for without anybody voting on under the Royal Protocol. And it states that by 2030, every person on Earth should have a legal identity. Sounds pretty harmless, right? But what that really means is a global digital identity system, a system where every individual is trackable from birth to death. And this isn't just a thing that they've written on paper. The UN's Economic and Social Council, along with the World Bank's ID4 initiative, are already funding digital ID programs worldwide, embedding it in the infrastructure for a system where access to services, travel, or even financial transactions are dependent upon government approval. And it's a system pushed again and again by people like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, the WEF, most other government-funded NGOs and departments. In fact, there's now a whole industry pushing it, creating a whole new industry. It's only valued at £42 billion today, but by 2030, it's expected to be valued at over £150 billion. And of course, the introduction of mandatory digital IDs also gives supernatural organizations like the World Health Organization and the World Bank direct control over individuals in a way that they have never had before, perhaps even circumventing sovereignty of nations based on the non-compliance of its citizens. Like not enough people have got a digital ID, well then perhaps you can't borrow any more money. Forcing digital ID through nations. Now, the World Bank has already committed billions in funding for digital ID initiatives worldwide, starting in quite poor countries. Examples like Nigeria, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Morocco. As I said, they started with the poorest countries first because poor people are easier to control. Tell them they need digital ID to get food or a malaria vaccine, and of course they are going to do exactly as they are told. And guess who's right in the middle of all of this? The World Economic Forum. Again. Because they don't just support digital ID. No, they've written the blueprint for it. We've talked about their framework toolkits before. And they have a framework toolkit for digital identity. And it's a guide for governments to just overwrite into their laws. This one in particular is about how to implement and normalize digital ID. It's completely normal to have the government tell you what food you can buy. Totally normal. Anyway, I've digressed. Anyway, they've done all of this under the guise of efficiency, security, and economic development. And then there's the Rockefeller Foundation. Yep, they're in there. And they have an ID 2020 initiative, which has been a major financial force behind biometric digital ID programs. And their partners? Well, their partners are Microsoft, the UN, and the World Bank. All powerful institutions working towards the same goal, a digitized, trackable, and traceable global identity system for control. And here in the UK, well, digital ID is already creeping into daily life, quietly though, and without fanfare, because we really hate it here. And we have always hated it. No matter how much Blair and his pals have tried to push it, we still hate it. Your media's also pushed it, from the Financial Times to the Sun, trying to grab the entire citizen base of the UK. And they all discuss the convenience of digital ID and everything about you all being stored in a single access format. How brilliant would that be?
Finally, we've all left our wallets at home before, but forgetting your ID could soon be a thing of the past. The UK will reportedly issue digital driving licenses. The digital ID will be made available through a government app in an effort to make people's lives easier.
From how much carbon you used last week when you drove to Scunthorpe to visit your mum, the UK government's Digital Identity and Attributes Trust framework, mouthful, is shaping the future of digital ID in Britain. And whilst the UK government doesn't explicitly reference the WEF digital toolkit, it looks exactly the same. Both of them promote a trusted identity system linking ID across finance, healthcare and travel. Both of them emphasize the public-private partnerships, meaning corporations will manage digital ID alongside government. Well, who owns that information then? That's a lovely bit of data to sell, isn't it? Both the WEF framework and the UK's claim digital ID increases inclusion, but it doesn't, does it? Not if you refuse it, because then you're totally excluded. And of course, biometric verification is central to both frameworks, a key pillar of the WEF's ID model. That's your iris in your eyes and facial recognition. And of course, there's the taking of baby's DNA at birth, just anonymously, of course, totally anonymous, nothing to worry about. The UK government says digital IDs can be used across different sectors, helping people to verify their identity in a way that is more secure and reduces fraud. They say, we're working with international standards and regulatory bodies to align digital ID with global best practices. What? With global best practices? Well, it's a clear indication then, isn't it, that everybody is working together to build the same digital ID system for every human on Earth. And all the while, our government, telling us it isn't mandatory, slowly closes the net to scoop in as many of the low-hanging fruit as possible. So currently, it's just a trap. It's like Hotel California. Once you arrive, you can't leave. I actually quite like that song.
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Things like the one login to claim benefits, digital driving licenses, the right to rent and criminal records, all tied up and linked up. And yes, of course I see the benefit. Of course I do. I just don't trust it will ever be used for my benefit, particularly if I don't comply with what the government says. See, the UK isn't alone in this push. Across the world, digital ID is being forced on populations in all sorts of different ways. Even in Ukraine, you see their DIA app, no idea if I pronounced that correctly, has become a mandatory digital identity for accessing banking, for ID services and social benefits. And there are reports now that the Ukrainian government is using that DIA app to issue digital conscription notices to men of fighting age, notifying them of their draft status. So picture that. You've got a notification saying you've been conscripted. You decide, well, I don't want to go today. I might want to go next week. But you can't buy food because, you see, you've just been conscripted. And discussions have also taken place with them now about expanding military service records into the app, effectively linking digital ID to compulsory military service. And if it happened there, who's to say it couldn't happen here? In Nigeria, millions of people were locked out of their bank accounts because they hadn't registered for digital IDs. No ID, no money. In India, the Aadhaar system, the world's largest biometric digital ID system, has been linked to welfare, banking, and phone numbers. And cases are already emerging where citizens have been denied food rations because they didn't scan their digital ID at collection. So the government wants to know what you eat and how much you eat. And then in Australia, where digital ID is being linked to even the use of social media to ensure citizens are over 16. It's all about the safety of children. And whilst, of course, it isn't mandatory, it's fairly mandatory if you need to use the internet, which everybody does. And in the EU, the European Digital Identity Wallet is being rolled out further, integrating digital ID with personal finances and movement tracking. And the pattern is clear. Digital ID isn't about convenience. It's about the government being able to control citizens. Maybe they're scared. Maybe the more access that citizens have had to information, maybe they've considered them more uncontrollable. And so this is the way they will control them. So the ultimate link, of course, for digital ID is for everything, expanding it into central bank digital currencies. Financial transactions can then be controlled and monitored, into carbon tracking and social credit, where your consumption and behavior will be restricted, allowed or denied based on how you live. And a cashless society where refusing digital ID means exclusion entirely from public life. And once CBDCs are linked to digital ID, governments and banks can impose spending limits on things like fuel, on your travel, and even food purchases based on carbon credits. And so we already see carbon tracking tools in banking apps. Imagine a system where you're blocked from buying fuel if you've exceeded your monthly carbon quota. And it doesn't stop at the environment, because under the Data Access Bill, governments could use digital IDs to freeze accounts, restrict access to funds, or block transactions based on non-compliance with regulations. That's actually in the upcoming bill, paving the way. And if you haven't seen it, watch it. I did a video on it. If you rely entirely on a government-controlled digital systems, then what happens when they decide your opinion or your lifestyle doesn't align with their standards? Well, you're fairly well controlled, aren't you? And to the naive, and let's face it, there are millions of them, a digital ID sounds brilliant, so accessible, so easy. All my health records, my banking, and everything I need, all in one app, in one place. But to others, those who remember being excluded from their lives because they decided not to have a COVID vaccine, it's horrifying. And to those who've seen how the social credit system works in China, all based on biometric digital ID, it's a gross infringement of our privacy and a total overreach by government authorities. And of course they'll tell you digital ID will stop illegal migration, it will stop fraud, it will lower crime. Of course they will. But do you really trust Starmer's government, or any government, not to use it as a tool of control? See, your government should serve you. It's why we pay our taxes. We do it for them to provide us with services. But at an increasingly alarming rate, governments are taking almost total control over citizens' lives. And there's no point saying to me, if you've done nothing wrong, then what are you worried about? Because this is me you're talking about. Is it wrong to question the government? Is free speech really wrong? Because social credit digital IDs aim to make compliant drones out of citizens, so no one speaks out of turn. There is no dissent. You all just do as you're told. Digital ID isn't about identification. It's about control. Governments and corporations are pushing this system not for security, certainly not for yours, but for absolute power over every aspect of life. They will even charge you for the very air you breathe, if they can. And once digital IDs are in place, it won't be reversible. The only way to stop it is to reject it now, before it becomes mandatory. And let's face it, children today will know no different than total government control if we lose this fight. It's pretty much the battle of our lives. So it's not a conspiracy theory. It really is happening. The question is, will you comply? Let me know. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Like, subscribe. What do you think of digital ID? Am I completely wrong? Doubtful. Am I completely wrong? Thank you.